What's up, Tailgaters? You're in the booth with Tailgate Nate today. Welcome to my channel. Week 4 was an absolutely loaded week in the college football season that possibly could, my apologies there, possibly could be the best week in the college football season this year. Again, maybe week 8 lives up to that hype, but again, we're not there yet. This was an absolutely loaded week, a lot of really fun games, and there are a lot of changes, including some new teams in my top 25 poll this week. We're going to dive into all that here in just a little bit, but before we get there, just want to say thank you guys so much for the support the channel has seen as of late. Really does mean a lot. If you want to continue to help show your support and you haven't done so already, hit the subscribe button, ring the bell so you know when videos get uploaded, but there are more ways than that to help me support this channel. Hey, you guys are doing one of them right now just by watching this video, and you guys can do more by liking, commenting, sharing, really anything else you guys are willing and or able to do to help support this channel. Is going to mean a lot to me, and it has meant a lot for you guys to be able to support the channel in ways that you do. So, enough about me, though. Let's go ahead and dive right on into my top 25 video. And as per usual, it starts out with the honorable mention list. These are teams that either dropped out of the poll last week that I still feel like deserve a shot to get in, which there are 3 of them this week. You got Colorado, Iowa, and UCLA. All of them suffered losses this past week. Colorado, of course, kind of got exposed with their weaknesses along the offensive line and defense without Travis Hunter. If they can step it up, they'll be right back in the top 25. Got a lot of big games to be able to prove themselves. Iowa, same thing. Get that offense rolling. You only had the ball for 15 minutes against Penn State. We'll talk about that when we get to the Nittany Lions. But the Hawkeyes definitely have the defense and a good enough offense to help them win games. They can absolutely get back in the top 25. UCLA is there as well if Dante Moore can really find his momentum back. That's the UCLA defense that played really well. So if Dante Moore can just find that momentum back, UCLA can break back in to the top 25. But there are a lot of other teams that still, I believe, deserve mention. Clemson, even after suffering their second loss on the season, I still believe Clemson is a top 25 caliber team. That defense is really good, and you just push Florida State to the absolute limit. So I still think Clemson deserves a mention here, but then you have a lot of other teams on the board here as well. Florida, their only loss is to Utah. You have a pretty good win there against a Tennessee team that is still ranked in my poll. Spoiler alert, some other SEC schools in there as well, including Texas A&M and Kentucky, a couple other schools out of the Big Ten here in Maryland and Wisconsin. You got another school out of the ACC in Louisville. They're still undefeated. TCU still right there in the conversation to get back into the poll, and then a Group of 5 team in Tulane. There is a Group of 5 team ranked in my poll this week, but it is not the Tulane Green Wave, and it's where we start here at number 25. How about the Fresno State Bulldogs? They already have a couple Power 5 wins this season. They've beaten the Purdue Boilermakers. They've beaten the Arizona State Sun Devils. That's when the Sun Devils turned the ball over 8 times in that game. And last week they just went out and absolutely smashed Kent State. And I got to tell you, Fresno State might be that Group of 5 team this year that really emerges and separates themselves from the pack. Now, there are a lot of other contenders there, and Tulane is definitely still a team that can go make a run at a New Year's 6 bowl game. But Fresno State right now is my front runner to be able to break into that Group of 5 spot. And maybe a little spoiler alert there for my New Year's 6 college football playoff predictions that come out on Wednesday. But regardless, this is a Fresno State team that has looked really good. They finally deserve a spot in the top 25 here, and I do have them there at number 25. Missouri finally breaks into my top 25. They had the big win against Kansas State 2 weeks ago, and then Missouri just won their game this past week, so they now move to 4-0. They beat an undefeated Memphis team that, hey, is a pretty solid team there. So they gave Memphis their first loss on the year, neutral site game in St. Louis, and Missouri has looked very impressive. Brady Cook to Luther Burden is one of the most dynamic quarterback wide receiver combos that I have seen so far this year, and it's about finally time that Missouri gets their rightful place in the top 25 poll. They're here for me at number 24, but I still like one of their old rivals here just a little bit more, and that is the Kansas Jayhawks. I love what Jalen Daniels and this Kansas team are doing for the second straight year. They've started out 4-0. I know last year they started out 5-0. They'll get a chance to do that when you have to go play a top 5 team in Texas. Yikes. That's going to be a really tough game for the Kansas Jayhawks to go win, but I have seen this defense take some steps in the right direction. Kansas already has a couple marquee wins under their belt. You just beat an undefeated BYU team last week, a couple weeks ago. They're on a Friday night, a blackout game there in Memorial Stadium in Lawrence, Kansas. You had the Jayhawks beat a Power 5 team with the Illinois Fighting Illini, who are a pretty solid team out of the Big Ten West. So Kansas here is definitely a very, very, very solid team, and they're going to have their opportunity to prove themselves this week when you play the Texas Longhorns. That's going to do it for the new teams in this poll. Otherwise, every other team in the poll is the same, but there are some positions moved. As you see here, Tennessee and Kansas State have both risen up here 2 spots. Tennessee was able to win their game this past week, and especially the offense really got better for this Tennessee team last week. I mean, they played a fairly tough UTSA team, and they handled them easily. That was an easy game for the Tennessee Volunteers. The offense was clicking. The defense was able to shut down Frank Harris and company. Frank Harris is a very, very explosive group of pass catchers, very, very good running back room. So I was kind of surprised to see Tennessee's defense step up there, but hey, all the more reason to jump them up here in my top 25 poll. Still a couple things to fix, and Tennessee, if you want to slide them above Kansas State here, wouldn't be against that at all, but Tennessee definitely did take some steps in the right direction last week, as did the Kansas State Wildcats. Again, you lost to Missouri on the walk-off 60-plus yard field goal. That was just absolutely insane. Last week, you got a chance to really be able to prove it against UCF. And while there were some shaky moments in that game for Kansas State against the Central Florida Knights, Kansas State was able to come out on top, and I believe come out on top by 2 scores. So Kansas State really elevated their level of player, and I still think Will Howard's got a really, really solid team around him. I still believe in this coaching staff, still believe in this defense. Although the defense does have a lot of things to work on. Kind of my thing with Kansas State this year, get that defense to take some steps in the right direction. But they're going to sit here at number 21. So there's 25 through 21. As we break into the top 20 here, Miami did fall 1 spot. Now, it's not because I haven't been impressed with what they did last week. In fact, that is the opposite of true. Miami, Tyler Van Dyke still look really, really good. I don't really have much more to say about the Miami Hurricanes. You're going to have some games down the line here where you're really going to get a chance to prove yourself. Clemson is still on the schedule here for Miami. I believe North Carolina is still on the schedule. Hurricane fans, Tar Heel fans, you can correct me if I'm wrong there in the comment section below. But what I'm trying to say is Miami still got a lot of games where they can go out and prove themselves, and they can play a really, really good brand of football and elevate themselves from where they are in the poll right now. But the reason they dropped a spot is because there were some teams that just simply jumped ahead of Miami. Now, the two in front of them here were not one or were not either of those two. They were already ahead of them last week, but they did fall after losses from previous weeks. And honestly, I don't think either team really played that bad. Ole Miss definitely had a struggle getting their offense to work against an Alabama defense that really was able to figure things out. But that Ole Miss defense did step up, did make some pretty solid plays. Just overall, the offense couldn't really get a whole lot working there against an Alabama defense that played, I mean, Class A ball. That was a really, really good defensive performance there out of the Alabama Crimson Tide. Ole Miss drops 4 spots because of it to 18. Oregon State, who was right behind Ole Miss last week, is also going to drop 4 spots with them to number 19. Now, Oregon State is not a team where I am really panicking, right? That loss to Washington State, who we see here at number 17, is just part on Washington State being a really, really good football team and Pullman being a very, very hard place to play. Oregon State's got a big one this week when you face off against the Utah Utes Friday night. So the two, and Ole Miss, by the way, has a game against LSU coming up this week as well. So 2 games here for both Ole Miss and Oregon State to really go out and prove themselves and really have a nice opportunity for a bounce back game here next week, do both of those squads. So very excited to see what the future holds here for Ole Miss and Oregon State, 2 teams that I don't think are bad at all. That's not why they dropped. Definitely maybe some issues on both teams that you're going to want to fix, that you're going to want to resolve. But overall, like the way that both these 2 teams are playing, they still remain in my top 20. But let's talk about the Washington State Cougars now. I mean, this is the team that out of the Pac-12 race just kind of seemingly came out of nowhere. We know that Cam Ward was a very, very good quarterback, but he was dealing with basically an entire new field of weapons coming into the year, and he has not skipped a beat. Washington State looks fantastic offensively. Defensively, maybe a little shaky things here and there, but for the most part, they were able to hold Oregon State really, really well. They were able to contain Damian Martinez. DJU was not a super huge factor there. Now, Oregon State ended up ramping it up and scored a lot of points there towards the end. But for the most part in this game, I mean, Washington State just looked like a complete sound football team. And I think Washington State absolutely has played their way into the Pac-12 title conversation. I think Washington State is that good. If Cam Ward can continue on whatever he's on, if he can continue playing the way that he's playing, Washington State's going to do some big things this year, and you got a lot of games still on the schedule being in the Pac-12 conference for you really to go out there and be able to prove yourself and really be able to say, like, hey, this is the team we are. We can pull off this win. They got opportunities to do that. Duke is up here 2 spots at number 16. Again, you can flip Washington State and Duke there. It was really hard for me to decide between those two teams, but I went with Duke, not necessarily because I think they have the better win, the better resume. I just overall think that Duke is the better team. And I do think that I would favor Duke on a neutral field if them and Washington State were to play tomorrow. I think I'd favor Riley Leonard and this Duke defense that really has stepped up from what I expected in preseason expectations, especially in the defensive backfield within that secondary. But I mean, Riley Leonard, this Duke team still playing phenomenal. I believe they blew out UConn this past week. Hey, huge, huge game for the Blue Devils coming up this week as you welcome the Notre Dame Fighting Irish to Durham, North Carolina. That is going to be something to watch. So an interesting test for Duke coming up here, but they do rise 2 spots up to number 16. All right, let's go ahead now and get into our top 15, where we see another team out of the ACC, and that's the North Carolina Tar Heels. Honestly, I kind of looked at that game and was watching a little bit of that game there Saturday night and thinking, man, North Carolina may end up dropping this game to Pitt, and then boom, the burners turned on. Drake May looked a lot more impressive than he has in some previous performances this season. Really was able to get the Drake May stat line going. This is a North Carolina defense that when it needed to, stepped up, created pressure, made some really, really big plays. And all in all, you got to be happy with the way this North Carolina team is really being able to come along, right? North Carolina is a team that I really, really like. I think they're definitely the second team there behind Florida State in the conversation for the best team in the ACC. That's going to be a very interesting team to watch here throughout the year, but Drake May and company really were able to get it together there to be able to avoid a scare with the Pitt Panthers. Oklahoma's also jumped 2 spots here up to number 14. Got to be happy with the way that Dylan Gabriel and company have played. Now, they have been a little inconsistent here. When you've played some of the better teams on the schedule here, Dylan Gabriel and company have not really put up the video game numbers that we've seen Oklahoma put up this season, right? When they played SMU and most recently when they played Cincinnati, the offense definitely felt like it could have done a little bit more, but this is an Oklahoma defense that has stepped up, has really proved a lot of people wrong. It's an Oklahoma defense that really is capable of making some big, big plays. Dylan Gabriel of old, maybe the UCF version of Dylan Gabriel, I don't want to say it's kind of resurfaced, but Dylan Gabriel has found something within him to really elevate his play from last season. That's why Oklahoma's up 2 spots here to number 14. Alabama has stayed right where they are, just the case of me liking 12 other teams a little bit better than I like the Alabama Crimson Tide right now, but the Crimson Tide have finally really been able to get it together last week, as I thought they would have, but I also did not expect them to limit Jackson Dart, Lane Kiffin, and this Ole Miss offense to only 10 points. I mean, that was a great showing out of the Alabama defense. Jalen Milroe is definitely the answer in that quarterback room for this Alabama team. And really, there were some really good plays made on both sides of the ball from this Alabama unit. Was really, really impressed with the way that they played. Now, again, they don't move just because I ended up liking 12 teams just a little bit better, and one of them is still the LSU Tigers. Now, I had a big debate, too, on whether or not I switched Alabama and LSU, whether or not Alabama went to 12 and LSU went down there to 13. but I'm slightly still leaning towards the LSU Tigers because I think Alabama has a little bit more room to improve, right? I still think Alabama has some room to get better, especially offensively with Jalen Milroe and company. LSU, though, I mean, you've kind of seen an inconsistent version of LSU so far this season. You got two different sides to the story in that first game of the year against Florida State. We saw a really, really good LSU team there in the first half of that game. And then in the second half, it definitely seemed like it backed off, right? And LSU maybe didn't play their highest level of football. But when you go ahead and take a look at what LSU's been able to do over the past 2 weeks. They had a huge bounce back game. They blew out Mississippi State, blew the brakes off of them, and then you come back home and you really struggle against an Arkansas team that just got trounced by BYU the week before. Now, BYU, obviously not a bad football team. BYU's played a lot of quality games and has played a lot of quality time this season. They actually kept it fairly close there with the Kansas Jayhawks, again, a team that I have ranked in my top 25 poll. But LSU has been inconsistent this year. They got a big game against Ole Miss this weekend. Which version of LSU shows up? It's going to be a very, very big key game to watch this upcoming weekend. But I did jump Utah over the LSU Tigers, which is why the Tigers have dropped one spot. Look, Utah has been very, very impressive, especially defensively, right? And I cannot wait for the game that Cam Rising comes back. Now, who knows? It may very well be this upcoming game against the Oregon State Beavers, and Utah may need Cam Rising there against an Oregon State defense that has really hounded the run. It's a defense that is physical, and it's an offense with DJU that can put up some points. We saw that in the Washington State game. We've seen that in other games that Oregon State has played this season as well. So for the Utah Utes, I think they are going to be just fine without Cam Rising for the time being. But as you get deeper and deeper into Pac-12 play and you start playing some teams like USC and Oregon and some of those other higher level Pac-12 teams that are on their schedule, it'll be interesting to see how good Utah can be, especially offensively, if you want to keep with some of these other offenses here. I think Cam Rising is going to be a big piece of that. Hopefully, he can get back this week for the huge Friday night matchup against the Oregon State Beavers. But now we're going to go ahead and delve into my top 10, and I know what all of you are thinking out there right now. How is Notre Dame still in the top 10? They've lost. Not how my poll works. Notre Dame did lose in heartbreaking, dramatic fashion. Chip Trayanum ran it into the end zone on the final play of the game. Well, there was the kickoff and the Sam Hartman lateral type thing. But reality, what was the final play of the game? Notre Dame only had 10 men on the field. Ouch. But if you are the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, if you are an Irish fan out there, you need to keep your head up because this Notre Dame team, I think, just proved that even though they lost in a very, very difficult way, this Notre Dame team proved it's a true college football playoff contender. And look, you did lose a really, really big, important home game, right? You still have a lot of opportunities to prove yourself, especially against the team that we see here at number 9 in the USC Trojans. Notre Dame still has them on the schedule. I believe that matchup comes there in week 8. Notre Dame still has Clemson on the schedule. And look who Notre Dame goes on the road and plays this week, a top 20, if not top 15 opponent in some people's eyes in the Duke Blue Devils. You go on the road and play the Louisville Cardinals, who are also undefeated up to this point. Notre Dame's got a lot of opportunities to get some big key marquee wins here. Do not count the Irish out. Sam Hartman and this Notre Dame defense played really, really well. They ultimately came up just really a yard short, if not centimeters short. But I talked about USC being here at number 9, dropping 2 spots. And right now they are, in my current opinion, not necessarily the third best team in the Pac-12 conference, but they are rated the third highest, meaning there are 2 other Pac-12 teams rated above them, as you see there at 7 and 8. We'll talk about them when we get there. But USC really struggled with an Arizona State team that couldn't do anything against Fresno State, has really, really struggled in some other games that they have played so far this season, and it all kind of fell on that USC defense, right? USC's defense was not able to slow down what Arizona State was able to throw at them every single time, which is a problem, especially when, again, USC still has some really, really good offenses on their schedule. Utah's on the schedule. Who knows what that offense will look like when Cam Rising comes back. I believe Oregon is on that schedule. You have Washington there. Notre Dame is there. USC's got a lot of really, really tough games coming up. Now, they do have Colorado this week. Maybe a chance for them to really start to find their footing. It'll be a nice test for this USC defense here, right? But USC definitely still got a long way to go on the defensive end of the ball. We know the offense is spectacular. I don't have to speak on that. We all know that the offense is great. But the defense, it's time to start taking that next step. It's time to start taking that leap. And USC drops 2 spots because of it. Not in part that their defense has looked super subpar, but the fact that Oregon and Washington were very, very impressive and have been very, very impressive throughout this entire year. And Oregon just went and boat raced a Colorado team that had all the momentum in the college football world with them. It had all the media momentum, it had all the fan momentum. It just had everything was working well for the Colorado Buffaloes, and Oregon just absolutely curb stomped Colorado in that past game, kind of exposing some of the weaknesses of that Colorado team. But Bo Nix is a true Heisman contender. This Oregon defense has stacked up really, really nicely. Oregon's a top-tier contender in the college football playoff there as well, but I don't think they've been the most impressive team in the Pac-12 so far. I believe that has been the Washington Huskies. Where do I even start with this team? We know they have one of the best wide receiver cores the nation has to offer, right? But take a look at some of the stats that Michael Penix has put up. I mean, I believe he has 16 touchdowns through 4 games this season. This is a Washington offense that is looking like the best offense in college football this year. Their passing attack is working. Their run game is working. It's a Washington defense that, while it's had its struggles at times, have really been able to step up in some bigger moments. And Washington has a lot of marquee wins on their schedule and on their resume already. You beat a really, really good Group of 5 team in Boise State. You beat a Cal team last week that is underrated by many, and then you beat a Michigan State team that albeit is going through some things, but still a Power 5 win nonetheless. So for the Washington Huskies, Michael Penix is my Heisman frontrunner right now. I think he's played mighty, mighty impressive. He's putting up some ridiculous, ridiculous numbers, and Washington's my number 7 team in the nation here as of right now. They definitely can be a lot higher. If you put them a lot higher, I'm not going to argue too much with you. Just 6 teams that I happen to like a little bit more than the Washington Huskies, one of them being the Penn State Nittany Lions. Where do I even start? It was the whiteout game this past week. Iowa held the ball for not even 15 minutes. Penn State, I think I saw something, ran 60 more plays, if not more, than what Iowa ran in that game. They forced 4 Hawkeye turnovers, only allowed 76 yards or something like that, and shut the Hawkeyes out. Penn State is legit this year. They're going to challenge Ohio State. They're going to challenge Michigan. And who knows? I'm not going to sit here and say it is fully crazy. In fact, it's very, very realistic to say that Penn State could be the team representing the Big Ten in the college football playoff. Drew Aller is legit. This offense is legit. This defense is legit. Everything is working right now for James Franklin's Penn State Nittany Lions. The schedule is only going to get tougher from here. You have Ohio State in about a month, and then there on November 11th, you got Michigan coming in to Happy Valley. So we'll see what Penn State does down the line, but they have been mighty impressive so far this season, which leads me into my top 5. The teams in my top 5 have not changed, yet the order has. We are going to start at the top here. Well, actually, never mind. We're going to start here at the bottom with the Florida State Seminoles. They have dropped 2 spots, but it's not because I'm devaluing what the Florida State Seminoles have done so far this season, right? Florida State has a lot of big wins on their schedule, right? You have the LSU. That's a big win on the schedule. And even though Clemson is not ranked, even though Clemson might be being talked down by some other media people and some other analysts and whatever, right? Clemson might be being talked down right now. That's a quality football team that Florida State just went and beat, right? Cade Klubnik did not look bad. That's a Clemson defense that is elite, is really, really good. But Florida State definitely, if they keep cutting it close like this, they're going to trip up, right? And Boston College was, I think, a huge indicator of that. And if the Clemson kicker had not missed a chip shot field goal, we wouldn't be talking about Florida State in the top 5 any longer, and maybe kind of thinking like, okay, were we getting a little too high on Florida State early? Florida State's got some things they have to clean up. However, overall, Jordan Travis and the experience and the talent that has been brought into this Florida State team are really, really good. I believe they still deserve a spot in the top 5 and are still, and now beating Clemson, probably have already solidified a spot in the ACC championship game, although I just knocked on wood for all of you Seminole fans there at home. Texas moved up a spot here to number 4, as well as Ohio State moving up a spot from 4 to 3. So Texas moved from 5 to 4, and Ohio State moved from 4 to 3. We'll talk about all that here. Texas did not play down to the level of competition last week. They went and thoroughly were able to trounce the Baylor Bears. Quinn Ewers still looks phenomenal. This is a Texas defense that's really been able to turn it on. That pass rush has really come along. Steve Sarkisian's group in the Texas Longhorns are a real player here in the college football playoff. An interesting game coming up with the Kansas Jayhawks here this week. That should be a fun one. That should be a very interesting one to watch. But Texas absolutely going to be the favorite there in that game. Keep doing what you're doing. If you are the Texas Longhorns, clearly the best team in the Big 12 Conference as of right now. Ohio State is up here at number 3. Now, what I'm going to say about this is if you want to put Ohio State at 4 and you want to put Texas at 3, that is totally fine with me. I also just look at it as if I were to put the two teams on a neutral site field right now, who I would favor. I think I would favor the Ohio State Buckeyes, not by much, maybe a point, maybe a point and a half, but that's kind of the spread that really we're working with here. You maybe even could consider that a half a point line there, but I truly do think that people need to stop doubting this Ohio State team. Yes, this is true. Notre Dame was really able to run the football well, and Ohio State's offensive line and defensive line productions still may not be all there, right? It still might not be fully fleshed out. Kyle McCord as a quarterback still might not be fully fleshed out. All of that is true, but the Buckeyes put it together when it mattered most. Those last 2 drives, both on the Ohio State defensive end, came up with some huge plays, were really able to get pressure down there to Sam Hartman, which they hadn't been able to do really all game. They were able to push the offensive line back, but Sam Hartman's jersey was relatively clean there in that game, and this Ohio State offense, and especially quarterback Kyle McCord, really had a coming-of-age story. Just absolutely phenomenal to be able to convert a 4th and 7, a 3rd and 19, a 3rd and 10 on that final drive. Magical. That's the stuff that kids dream of. Ohio State accomplished it, and I think they deserve to be jumped up here in the poll. So they are up here to number 3. Top 2 teams in the nation, though, have stayed the same. Michigan is still here at number 2, and the reason Michigan is still here at 2, I don't really see any reason to panic about Michigan quite yet. Yes, they haven't really played to the level of their competition. They haven't really blown out. They haven't really taken full advantage of an opponent that they're supposed to, especially an opponent like Rutgers here this past week, where it still was a little bit of a struggle for the Michigan Wolverines, but they haven't had to. Very interesting road game coming up against Nebraska. We'll see what the hostile environment in Memorial Stadium is able to do for this Michigan Wolverine team. I believe it's actually going to be their first road game of the season here, as we're about a third of the way through the college football season. So it'll be interesting to see what Michigan comes up with. It'll be interesting to see how they handle that environment. But I think J.J. McCarthy definitely has taken a step back from last year. Now, he is getting a lot more reps, but I think he's got to play a little bit better. It's a Michigan defense that maybe is not as physical as it was. Still really, really physical, though. Michigan's still a very sound football team, but Georgia obviously still that number 1 team. Although they haven't really looked like the number 1 team this year, you could argue that really no one has. There's a flaw on every single team this year. Georgia does not have as dominant of a running back room as they usually do, while the defense is still superb, is still elite physically, athletically. That Georgia defense is second to none when you compare it to any other defense that the country has to offer. There are some problems offensively. You got Brock Bowers. You got a pretty solid offensive line, but Carson Beck might not be as good as Stetson Bennett. The running back room might not be as good as it has been in years past. And Georgia really will not be tested until a lot later on in the season. So Georgia's got some games to be able to work some things out. But as of right now, I still set the Georgia Bulldogs there at number 1. And no other team has really given me a reason to jump above them. And yes, you could make some arguments for some teams, but that's my top 5 as of right now, guys. That's my top 25 as of right now. Again, it's a long season. We're about a third of the way through here. A lot is going to change in the next 2 to 3 months. So, hey, appreciate all you guys watching. Remember to play hard, but tailgate harder. I'll see all you guys in the next video. Goodbye.